Where can you find 6,000 local businesses with just one click? EverythingMidmo.com.
Hi, and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast. We're following up the Missouri Tigers' 52-12 victory over Furman last week. Dave, a little bit of a slow start for the Tigers, and about midway through the first quarter, we saw the first real trick play of the year, a throwback pass to Deniro Alexander, who then threw a touchdown pass to Jared Perry, and that sort of opened the floodgates. Missouri scores 42 points by halftime and really runs away with it. Haven't seen a whole lot of trick plays out of David Yost as the offensive coordinator, compared especially to Dave Christensen, who loved them. What's your feeling on the value of those kind of gadget plays?
Well, you know that last year they opened one up, similar play actually, against Southeast Missouri State, and their 1AA opponent. I think those are the games that Missouri likes to use those because, for one, the chances of them working are probably a lot better against a lesser opponent. And I think they like to use those to set up some other plays for other opponents down the road, because now in Nevada, Nebraska, Oklahoma State has to prepare for those plays, and Missouri can run a formation similar to what they did with the trick play and then run something else out of it. So they look down the road and have some real long-term vision when they do something like that. And that play itself was had the look of a play that they ran the week before against Bowling Green, and they obviously did the trick out of it instead. So I think, you know, it might look a little Bush League that they do those against the 1AA opponents, but I think those are the ones where they know it's going to work best. And Jared Perry, as we saw, went right by his man and just too fast for them to cover, and it worked perfectly. In
that case, though, of course, it's a scoreless game, so it wasn't like they were pouring it on at the end. I also thought it was interesting. I was talking to David Yost after the game about trick plays, because I think in Gary Pinkel's press conference, he mentioned that he would kind of like to run more of them. Right. But in talking to David Yost, he had some interesting things about how he kind of views it as he's kind of trying to deceive the defense, but he doesn't just see it as with these trick plays. You know, he likes to do it through formations. He mentioned how he likes to maybe run a formation where you got four receivers on the short side of the field, and by doing that, you're setting the defense up. So a lot of times he's running just what look like normal plays, but in his mind, he's setting them up to deceive the defense, and I don't think he sees the difference. He's just right. And that was an interesting conversation. I think you would really have to pay pretty close attention to know the different formations they're running regular plays out of to see what he's up to. But I think from his point of view, maybe he's not quite as in love with them as Christensen was. Yeah, and I also think that, like Pinkel kind of touched on, you have to have a little bit of momentum on offense to have the confidence to pull out one of those plays. And early on in that game, and especially the week before against Bowling Green, they were struggling just to get a first down. So you don't necessarily have the swagger, the confidence to be able to pull that out until you know you can at least run a standard conventional play and get a first down. So I think that was a little bit of a factor too. This week, Beau Brinkley, the long snapper, a former walk-on, was elevated to first-string tight end over Andrew Jones. Just first of all, maybe your thoughts on that move, whether you think it's an elevation for Brinkley or maybe a demotion for Andrew Jones, and then also just maybe the state of Missouri's walk-on program. He's another walk-on that's contributing. Yeah, I think it's twofold there, that move. You know, I've always been impressed with Beau Brinkley and what he's done in practice. In scrimmages, in scrimmages, yeah, and he's bounced back and forth between tight end and one of those outside receiver positions. Up until this week even, he was the outside receiver backup to Wes Kemp and didn't get in the games very much, hasn't even caught a pass yet. But he played tight end before, a little bit last year, and then during two-a-days this year up until about midway through. So they know that he can run out there and get open and catch passes. And Andrew Jones didn't have a very good night the other night. He had one catch. He had two penalties. He had a costly one, a legal block that was 15 yards that set up a second and 24, I believe, on Missouri's third possession. Then on 3rd and 3, he had a false start. And that's a huge down and down distance to make a mistake like that on. And Gary Pinkel let him know that he was pretty disappointed with that play on the sideline. And then late in the game, there was a personal foul that was attributed to Kirk Lakebrink, an offensive lineman. I think that might have actually been intended for Andrew Jones. So he was frustrated. He wasn't. He's not. Producing a lot at that position like some of us thought he would, because he was pretty good last year when he came in for Kaufman. I think he caught 20 passes last year. And so far this year, it's for whatever reason, I know he's dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury.
The production just hasn't been there. So maybe this is a little bit of a wake-up call. But I also think that Beau Brinkley's done enough to earn some more playing time, and he's a good athlete out there. Obviously he's the long snapper, and that's what he's here to do. And that's how he earned his scholarship. But I've always been impressed with his hands.
Yeah, very good hands. I don't know what he's like as a blocker, although they don't ask their tight ends to block a whole lot,
yeah.
Inline blocking anyway. The one concern would be, obviously, if you get the guy hurt, that can throw your team to disarray if you suddenly don't have your deep snapper.
Right.
But I guess that's a risk they were willing to take. Walk-ons in general, we've seen, last year's team maybe more so than this year. You had Colin Brown, a former walk-on, Tommy Saunders, a former walk-on, Jeff Wolford, a former walk-on. Those are key contributors. How do you see the state of this walk-on program?
Well, I think it's pretty strong, and I think it really sends a message out to kids around the state, especially, that you may have a chance to play at a smaller school, at a Missouri State or a SEMO, even a Northwest Missouri State, and you might have a chance to go up there and get a partial scholarship. But you can come to Missouri too, and if you're good enough and if you work hard enough, you can get a shot at a little bit of playing time and maybe a scholarship. Brandon Droz, the best example. He took advantage of a couple injuries during the spring, and he was at times Missouri's best wide receiver during spring practices, and it put him on scholarship. And right now he's a backup, and he played a bunch against Furman. I think they'd like to get him in the games a little bit more because he's proved he can do it. So that's a great message. Tommy Saunders is obviously the best example, and Tommy actually is really the one responsible for getting Beau Brinkley on the team. They went to the same high school. He told Andy Hill about Brinkley, said he could definitely long snap. They gave him a look, brought him in. He was great at it last summer. They gave him the job right away, and they put him on scholarship after the season. Now he's the starting tight end. So a lot of good stories there, and I think it's pretty cool that Gary Pinkel gives those kids opportunities like that, because we've seen so many starters over the years that started off as nondescript walk-ons that we didn't even know their names when they got here.
I think the key to a really good walk-on program is to have a long enough stretch of success that, grade school kids, middle school kids, when they get to be seniors in high school, they would rather, Missouri football is so ingrained in them, they would rather walk on at Missouri than to get go play at Central Missouri or play at Northwest Missouri or Missouri Western, even though you could probably start there. And if those are the kids that are going to help you as walk-ons, now there's always going to be the guys who are just kind of the human tackling dummies, and if that guy wasn't there, then some other guy would be there. And they serve a purpose, but they're not really helping you win games. But if you can get the kids who could start at a D2 school, then you've got a chance to improve your team with them. And I think we're seeing it with some of these guys, like Colin Brown, starts as a project, but has the size at least you want. Obviously, Tommy Saunders is probably the best example last year. Lastly, last two games for Missouri were pay-per-view games. This week's game is going to be on ESPN on Friday night. Just touch on, you wrote about this Friday in the paper. Mike Alden's kind of been out front a little bit in the last few weeks on the Big 12's television package, and kind of not in a positive way. He's not thrilled with it, and especially when you compare it to the Big 10 or the SEC. And basically, as he was telling us at a luncheon the other week, that a comparable school maybe in the SEC to Missouri is Mississippi, and with their new television deal, basically they got $8 million more of just found money based on that deal. And that can create a competitive imbalance when you're talking about paying coaches, luring coaches, keeping coaches.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's really interesting. John Calipari gets this record-breaking deal at Kentucky to be their new basketball coach, and their school really didn't even have to tap donors to pay for that. It essentially came from the windfall of the SEC football TV package that this money just fell in Kentucky's lap, and Kentucky's not even a strong football program. So I think it kind of that deal with ESPN last summer kind of caught the Big 12 napping a little bit. The Big 12 had a TV deal through ESPN and through its partners at Fox set up previously, and it still has many years left on that. And the SEC deal kind of crept up on them a little bit. It also caught the Big 12 in the middle of a transition between their commissioners, between Kevin Weberg and Dan Beebe. So there was a little bit of instability at the top, I think. And now, as Mike explained, I think if you just look at the numbers, the market's pretty full at this point. I mean, there's nowhere else for the Big 12 to really go. I think their solution or their hope is that they can renegotiate their current deal. And the biggest concern for a school like Missouri is better exposure and more money, because they're losing out on cash that can go to pay coaches bigger salaries, which they're doing in the SEC. Just look at Lane Kiffin's staff at Tennessee, the millions of dollars he spent on all those assistant coaches he brought in, and facility upgrades too. So it set the Big 12 back, and I think the biggest problem with the Big 12 and finding a solution to it is there's not a lot of agreement between the haves and the have-nots, or really the have-a-lots and the have just a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the powers that be of Texas and Oklahoma, Nebraska, probably Texas A&M too, that
Mm-hmm.
aren't interested in revenue sharing, where you have that in the SEC and the Big Ten, where they
Mm-hmm.
split all the money on TV. And the Big 12, it goes toward who's on TV more. So Missouri would like to share those funds, and so would probably the majority of teams in the Big 12, but you need a supermajority vote to have that in place. So lots of stuff there, but basically the Big 12 TV contract puts the Big 12 teams, Mike Alden believes, and I'm sure a lot of his peers do, at a disadvantage compared to the other leagues and the big power leagues in the country.
And I guess as fans you might say, oh, who cares, TV contracts? But, we saw a situation after, Missouri has this great basketball season, then all of a sudden these SEC teams can just back up the truck to Mike Anderson's house and throw the checkbook at him. And,
Right.
and he chose to stay for less money, but not all coaches will. And so that can have a big impact on an athletic department, because essentially if the SEC can outbid everybody, then you're just going to have like a super conference of coaches
Sure.
there in college football, especially college basketball too. It's not really a players' league. The good players follow the coaches wherever they go. So that's a concern, I think, going down the line. That's a legitimate concern for Missouri and the whole Big 12. That wraps up this week's first edition of the webcast. Tune in tomorrow, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Nevada game.